we are excited to introduce Kevin Brownlee, Curator of Archaeology at the Manitoba Museum and member of the Norway House Cree Nation. Tonight, he will be sharing with us a presentation entitled Walking into a World Indigenous Curator of Archaeology.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a real honor. I have lots of really great friends, and that down in Minnesota, and it's awesome to be able to be sort of part of this this group. Yeah, the border that sort of separates Manitoba from Minnesota didn't exist, and my predecessor and mentor Lee Sims, who many of you might know, and has really sort of instilled that, and it's been something I've really cherished, and I've got great friends down there, and it's wonderful to reconnect. I wish it was in person, and can't wait to be able to visit and participate in visiting in real space again. So, but with that, I want to sort of enter into my presentation. I've got 65 slides, so I've got to go through these relatively quickly. But I kind of wanted to talk about how I guess I got to where I am, and how we sort of our experiences, how they shape our life and where we go. And so didn't really need much introduction, because I really wanted to talk about sort of how the various experiences through my life have really sort of molded how I do archaeology, how I practice, how I try and engage with communities, and that's both within First Nation or Native American communities, but also to the general public, the non-archaeologist, and how you sort of navigate this sort of world. And so there's what I do at the Manitoba Museum is really in sync with what the Minnesota Archaeological Society does. So I'll be talking about some of my youth and some of the training I received, and sort of when I started getting more on the professional side, sort of how my ideas have shifted over time and what I've sort of learned over the years of doing this. So going way back to sort of my birth, I was the product of my father, who was Cree from Norway House. My mother was Scottish, nurse practicing up in Norway House in northern Manitoba in the early 70s. And I was a product of their relationship, and they put me up for adoption. They didn't continue on a relationship, and I was adopted, raised in Winnipeg, so urban Winnipeg in the south, away from the forest, but always told that I belong, or my father had been from northern Manitoba and was Cree. And so my youth was really sort of defined and sort of trying to search for my identity and where did I fit into the world. I think there was trying to figure out, am I sort of Métis because my mom was Scottish, or am I Cree because of my dad's heritage? And so there were lots of questions and I was really sort of taken at a really young age. By the time I was 7, an uncle of mine who wasn't Native American was a high school principal and teacher. He had a real love of traditional technologies, and so he would show me how to make stone tools, how hides were tanned, making fire with sticks, and this sort of captured my imagination. And he took me out collecting arrowheads when I was about 7, and then picking up an arrowhead that hasn't been touched for hundreds or thousands of years, and thinking about the last person who held it really sort of was a touch point for me. And how was I at all related to this person? So it was a really interesting sort of process when I was young and growing up. Also sort of an influential part of me and my growing up was coming to the Manitoba Museum. And here's anyone who's been there, this is our mini diorama in our Boreal Forest Gallery. And this just sort of always captured my imagination. I was raised not in the Boreal Forest, but down in the south. And when I would go through this exhibit, I always sort of imagined this is how life was a long time ago in northern Manitoba. And I would come to the museum regularly, and I would look at this, and I would, oh, they've changed something over here, and something's moved over here. Now I work in a museum, and I realize that once these things, the glass goes up, they do not change. But I think it's one of these sort of magical pieces that a museum does, that a really well developed sort of mini diorama like this has a magic to it, where you notice things as you go through and look at it in different times. As I sort of started my really young career as a sort of summer student, I was really fortunate in the early 90s to work with Historic Resources Branch, which was with the province of Manitoba. And they were doing work up in northern Manitoba, particularly in the areas of Nischoyastik Cree Nation and Opipunapewin Cree Nation, two communities along the Churchill-Nelson River diversion. Now, this is an area that Manitoba Hydro had flooded and used sort of impounding of areas. And not only did this disrupt livelihoods, people's lifestyles, their economic base, introduced all kinds of social problems, but also had a real impact on the archaeological heritage and the heritage of these people. And so as a student, I was out doing surveys in these flooded areas in low waters in the spring. And one of the things that we were tasked with from the community was to sort of help in the identification, recovery of ancestral remains. And so, this was one of my first times into northern Manitoba, and first time really working with communities. I would explain my situation being adopted, and people in the community would sort of quickly adopt me as a little brother or a son, and all of a sudden I felt a bit of place. And at this time I still hadn't reconnected with my birth father, and it was a sort of a really wonderful time as I was sort of exploring my roots in northern Manitoba. And one of those that experience really taught me was the amount of respect that was paid to these ancestors. And so, this burial ceremony that we're at right in the slide here was of a burial that turned out to be 4,000 years old. And it didn't matter to these people that they were that old. This person was treated as a human being with respect. The proper ceremonies were conducted, asking basically that we were informing them of what we were about to do. And we covered the individual. They asked for research to be conducted on that individual, and that they come back and be reburied. It's a really sort of moving moment to see this sort of level of respect. Here are some of the tools that were associated with that individual. And when you look at them, like the beautiful craftsmanship, these are bone and antler tools and harpoons, a birch bark peeling tool, and an adze, are just quite remarkably made. We don't see these very often. Boreal forest is very harsh on bone and antler tools, and these ones that turned out to be 4,000 years old are incredible. One of the sort of parts of this agreement that we had with the northern communities, these Cree communities, was that the research that was done was returned to the communities in a variety of ways. And it was through reports, display cases, drawings, copies of these replicas would be returned. And it was really sort of, they gave us an opportunity to do some research and analysis on these that helped sort of enhance our understanding of the boreal forest. But at the same time, it was what are we giving back? And so it was trying to make sure that it fulfilled the wishes of the elders in the community that really saw these ancestors exposing themselves for a reason, and that was to reconnect the youth with their heritage and culture. Early on in that time, I wanted to learn from some of the people up in these communities about how high tanning was done in the north. And so I had some wonderful ladies in the community take me off to their camps and show me, how high tanning was done with moose hides and that. And it was a really great opportunity. And this one elder, Lottie Moore, was 107 when I interviewed her, and that's Lottie in the middle. And she was talking about tanning hides and sort of experiences of being basically growing up on the trap line. She didn't speak any English. I would show her tools and she would talk about them, and it was a really amazing opportunity. But one message that often came through when I would be learning and listening to these people, they said, there's not a lot of people are coming and asking us these questions, and make sure this information doesn't die with you, pass it on to others. And so here I am teaching my niece how to tan hides, another sort of piece that really stuck out to me was how Lottie and others in the community talked about, how fortunate young people are to be able to have two worlds of education, and that they, Lottie and many of these elders only learned from the bush. They didn't go to school. And today, these youth have an opportunity to go to school and get educated, but they sort of reminded us that we can't just learn that education system, that there is teachings from the land and from the community that we also must take. So it's balanced between those areas of education. In 1993, another burial and ancestral remains were recovered on South Indian Lake, and this was with Opipunapiwin Cree Nation. This is in the northern part of Manitoba, again, part of this hydro reservoir that South Indian Lake became as they were doing the diversion. And a whole range of tools dating to about the mid-1600s came out. We've got rib knives with copper and iron blades inserted into them, a couple of glass beads. So a really interesting time period when the Cree lifestyle was about to change forever, because these items would have been coming in before the arrival of the first Europeans. In that project, and I was an intern doing the research on this project, and I created a display case for the community and worked on a publication, Kasachiki Kawinau, Our Mother from Long Ago. And yeah, we tried to sort of write to an audience, like a younger and non-academic audience. We had appendices in the back that had some of the technical pieces, but we really wanted to keep it as publicly accessible as possible. And I think we did all right. I mean, particularly for the time, this came out in '99. We really wanted to see a teacher's guide developed, but it never really developed. Shortly after that ended, I got into a master's project and a program at the University of Manitoba. And I was working with the province of Manitoba as their Aboriginal liaison officer, focused on repatriation, and wanted a topic that engaged me and focused on experimental archaeology. The things that got me into archaeology were kind of how I wanted to do it, developing some kind of framework on how materials that are repatriated can be still studied. Engaging with knowledgeable community members really critical for me. And so that's what I did. I had a really great few years. Here I am out on Lake Manitoba chopping a hole. It's about -30 here. Some of the experimental archaeology people are like freezing buckets of water in a freezer and then chopping a hole in it. And to me, it just felt very abstract. And so here I am in like Manitoba in freezing cold weather, seeing an antler tool being used to chop a hole in the ice. And it worked amazingly well. And almost no damage to the end of it. And I did other things, peeling birch bark, making birch bark baskets. I did some fishing as well. Scaling of fish, there were some rib knives, and like these ribs do an amazing job of scaling whitefish. And so we were using those and whipping through whitefish as we were drying them. So again, for me, it was all about being actually on the land and practicing these in place. Now here are a couple of fantastic Minnesotans. There's Jim Jones and Grant Goltz. And when Myra Sitchin, my wife and I got married in 2010, Jim came up to northern Manitoba for our wedding and gifted us a birch bark canoe. The condition was we had to come down to Minnesota to actually make it. And so Myra and I, shortly after, she keeps reminding me that was not a honeymoon by any stretch. We then made a birch bark canoe over the course of about a week. And so we went down. And while you're doing this, the archaeologists, I think, and all of us are thinking, oh, what are the tools that are being used? And so the awls and various tools that people would have been using hundreds or thousands of years ago, and how they would have been using those to make bark canoes. There's Jim Jones Senior in the bottom right, and Grant up above. And one thing when we did it, like it was amazing to watch this sort of where it's this sort of science, engineering, and art coming together into this birch bark canoe. And I had sort of thought every birch bark canoe kind of was a birch bark canoe. They were all the same. And then very quickly realized how specific they are in design and form. And it really is a sort of an engineering marvel as you look at these. And so, yeah, another amazing experience for myself. Now back to that book that I came out with with Lee Sims in 1999. We were approached by William Dumas, who really wanted to see more done with this. He's from this community, and he wanted to see a kids book developed around this. And he wanted to engage community members, archaeologists, educators, historians, linguists, to basically reimagine what this woman's life would have been like. So she was 25 when she passed away, and he reimagined her in the book Peace and Finds Her Miskenau as a 13-year-old girl, as she's deciding what her what her life is going to take her, and it's about her deciding to follow a midwife path, and sort of a calling that she has. And so the project was really about focusing on Assiniskalavinawak, Rocky Cree youth with culture and heritage, really helping with language reclamation within the community as well. Just a couple of little spreads from in the book, beautifully illustrated by Leonard Paul, an Indigenous artist from the East Coast of Canada. Again, it's trying to sort of make archaeology more accessible. And so we really wanted to highlight that part of it. Another project that was really influential on me was this work I did with Pickerel Narrows, Granville Lake, or Okawamithukani First Nation. And it was all of thanks to Leslie Baker, who's in the bottom of this picture. And he was the head man in the community. And in his front yard was a late 1700s, early 1800s fur trade post, chimney mound in his backyard. And it was completely destroyed during a soil mitigation project, and letters to see it protected arrived after the destruction had happened. And he said, I can't, like, he was very invested in this. This was part of his history. He knew lots of stories about the fur trade, and was devastated to see that it was not preserved, protected, interpreted at that time. And so he had concerns about other developments in his territory, including hydroelectric, and really wanted to see youth and be more connected with culture and heritage, perhaps even a heritage tourism angle. So he brought me up into Granville Lake and took me to places that he felt were important and were important to the community. And these included stone quarries where First Nation people thousands of years ago had been digging out quartz to make their stone tools, cultural places, and the one thing that in going across the landscape with a person like Leslie, you realize how much knowledge is carried by these community, the people that are on the ground and visiting these places. And he would talk about where old villages used to be and where certain ceremonies were taking place. And like, it was, he was a history book as we sort of traveled around the lake. It was an amazing opportunity. Here's the largest quarry that we actually did work at, called the Grandfather Quarry. And this one was one of many. This particular one in our excavation, if they dug down about 2 meters, the excavation unit was about 4 meters in length and 2.5 wide. The geologist on our team estimated it would be about 200 metric tons of rock had been pulled out. We got dates off the very bottom layer of that at 6,500 years ago. And that would only be, those organics would only start occurring after they had removed 200 metric tons. So how long did that take? We did find some sand deposits around that area, and there were quartz flakes in the sand, and it looks like it's right near a beach of Glacial Lake Agassiz. And so when this was basically a beach shore, this quarry very likely was starting to be actively mined, and for the next couple of thousand years they were mining it. So really quite a remarkable piece. And then this comes down to sort of a bit on the trust side. Leslie Baker, I met him probably in about 2000. So, and he would, every time I would meet him, he would say, "Oh, you know, I've got some interesting places in my territory and on my trap line that you would be really interested in." And I never pushed him on it. You know, he would talk about it. And I learned after the fact that he really had a distrust of archaeologists and didn't really know who I was and what kind of commitment I would have. And so it took him 6 or 7 years before he actually trusted me enough to actually do the invite to get me into the community. And I think this is something that is really important for archaeologists trying to work with communities, that sometimes trust is not something you've got to earn trust, and it will take, in some cases, a number of years to acquire that trust. And so, yeah, this is the view out. Les is inside of the quartz quarry. You can see that rock wall, and surrounding it, it looks like it's hailed or snowed, are all quartz flakes. It's a remarkable site. You know, I mean, this is a place he's known about. It's called the Grandfather Quarry. Actually, go back. The stone in the bottom of picture, bottom right, is the grandfather upon which the Grandfather Quarry is named. And the story goes that it was a grandfather who turned himself to stone to watch over and protect the quarry. And so that's what we see as a glacial erratic, but that's the story that the community's got. And then, you know, one thing that's really been important to me, because it's kind of what got me into archaeology, was about engaging with youth. And so in '96, I was, you know, up in Nelson House teaching kids how to make fire, and we'd go out and later throw atlatls and you know, showing them how pottery is made. I've done some community archaeology projects, and there's some youth that we had out at us helping us to on our excavation that we were working on. And another, so I'm jumping project to project. Another project that was really influential to me was one with Saugeen Anishinaabe Nation. And this is was collaborative work with the province of Manitoba, and Gord Hill, who some of you may know, worked with the province. He was working with Saugeen on the recovery of ancestral remains, again, on the Winnipeg River, but this is really as a result of the hydroelectric dams on the river. And so again, same erosions happening. And he came to the museum, and the community liked the kinds of resources we were producing for the northern communities, and asked if the museum would be interested in doing something similar for Saugeen. And the museum agreed through Lee Sims, and I was sort of brought on early on. Now, this is, for any of you who know, this is sort of the bottom corner, southeast corner of Manitoba. Here are the two sites that we worked on, Two Eagles and Rivermouth, right on sort of Lac Duwani, where the Lee River comes into Lac Duwani. Huge flooding. So this sort of shows from 1948 versus 2014. And, you know, what was once mainland here is now sort of this island, and so massive erosion. And when you actually get onto the waterways there, you see these sort of eroding banks that keep sort of falling into the water, and it's in these clumps that these ancestral remains have come out. So this partnership that was established with this First Nation community in Manitoba, we had some sort of guiding principles. The ancestors were to always be treated with respect. Artifacts remain together with the human remains, and the artifacts were kept together whenever possible. reburial would occur after the analysis. We had a really open door policy with the community. If they had elders or youth in town, they would come down to the museum. The community did allow research, including destructive analysis, DNA, stable isotope, and AMS dating, and all research was to be made available to the community, replications for the creation of those sort of exhibits. So the osteobiography on this individual, this was a young male, 22 to 29, very good health, really well developed upper body. And there were 5 projectile points with this individual. And here's one of them in the corner. So we knew it was going to be somewhere in the sort of mid-intensification, mid-archaic period. And we did dates and came back with this sort of overlap about that 4,000 year ago age, 2130 to 1910 BCE was sort of the overlap between those. It's likely a little bit younger than that just due to the freshwater reservoir effect, but I'm not getting that. Some of the things that were associated with this individual were elk ivories. This is one of the oldest and largest pre-contact necklaces that were sort of recovered. One of the unique aspects of this, I've never seen in all of the research I've done, elk teeth are always got single holes and perforations in them, and these all had double hole perforations. Other items, there were shell beads around the head, copper earrings, so the skull was on the one ear was stained. We had this very, very large bear claw, sort of phalange, I'm quite sure what it was. Like a huge black bear was sort of one of the initial ideas, and with the possibility of a grizzly, and thanks to actually David Mather, who I think is on this call tonight, showed this to him, and he helped and sent this photo in the center, which shows a grizzly bear hind claws. So not the front claws, but the back claws. And there were 3 of these associated with this individual. So it's likely that they had a grizzly bear, something associated with them that made out of grizzly bear claws. This antler tool that had us puzzled for a while, triangular in shape with a hole drilled down the middle of it. And then as we were looking far afield down at the Indian Knolls site in Kentucky, we found these atlatl throwing boards that had antler or shell hooks and bone hooks, weights, and handles. And so the Two Eagles sort of imagined atlatl would be something like the center one, and these other sort of the line drawing ones are what was found in Kentucky. And so similar. Not sure. Again, some of these have been things we've never seen before, but it's certainly it's looking similar to those. And here are the points. So there's the 5 points, and then one spear point or notch biface right in the center. Again, type-wise, I kind of hedged around on what they are. Maybe table rock, which is sort of more of a southern example, but anyway, they are really unique, really consistent. They've got one corner that's a little more barbed and one that's a little less barbed, and so they're somewhere between a corner notch and a side notch. But even the biface has got this, sort of hooked down on one side and almost flat on the other, and all of them have that same sort of pattern. A harpoon head that we put together. Close-up of the drilled hole in the bottom. There's also a fish spear with this individual. This has some decoration on it using the fish resources. Part of the sort of agreement that we had with Seguin was that we would also use this at the Manitoba Museum. And so in our museum, we've actually got a little piece that describes this ancestor and the tools associated. So there's a set of replicas in that one in our permanent galleries at the Manitoba Museum. And shortly after that, we did the repatriation, and the individual was brought back and through ceremony was put to rest back in the first. That was sort of a really important component of that. Shortly after, we completed and then returned a display case that then had copies of the replicas that were made from those and brought into the community. It's in their cultural center. And so now the kids in the school have access to this as a resource in their area, and just talks about the age and what do we know about this individual. So, you know, after sort of the initial research and that, I sort of moved around a few jobs. Initially, I was a contractor, then I moved to the provincial government. And, you know, as a nonprofit organization, which the Manitoba Museum is, we kind of ran out of funds, and this is the book that I wanted to return to the community. And it kind of sat on shelves, and it was basically completed in about 2005. In 2011, I had a volunteer at the museum who had some graphic design skills, and so I had her do sort of take my monograph and put it into at least a rough manuscript. And it sat there for a while because there was no money to do anything. Here's a look at my table of contents. It's a pretty traditional way of archaeological place looks like. It's the local landscape, you know, the location, trade networks, excavation, the bones, the osteobiography, you know, talking about the hunting tools, the fishing tools, burial practices, pretty traditional. This is kind of how it looked. Again, we wanted lots of pictures, written in a layperson's term, and that's what we had. Anyway, in 2015, I was fortunate to be able to get a little bit of dollars, and I was preparing to get this published. And I figured, oh, I'm going to dust off this old monograph. I'm going to add in a few new references, get some new pictures, and we'll be off to the races and have this thing published and ready to go back to the community within 6 months. Like you saw from the table of contents, pretty traditional archaeological report, found that the ancestor's voice was missing, teachings that I received from the community were missing. And I to be honest, I hated everything about the publication. So I tossed the whole thing out and then basically started from scratch. I had some really great people as part of my team. This was taken after we sort of published it, but to my right is Ed Winters, and to my left is Jamie Isaac. Ed Winters was a graphic designer who'd worked and volunteered at the Manitoba Museum for ages, and he was really passionate about trying to get people excited about archaeology. And so I was so happy to have him on as editor and designer. And Jamie Isaac is from Saugeen, from the community that the ancestor was found in their territory. And she is the curator of contemporary Indigenous art at the Winnipeg Art Gallery at the time. She's just left there to go to another position out in British Columbia. But that was sort of my team. And what I really wanted to do in this book was to sort of take all of the teachings that I've kind of received and that over the years, respect, reciprocity, the patience, humility, trust, acknowledging different education systems and different ways of knowing, and making sure that the importance of elevating this is to something that the youth would engage with was really sort of my driving factors. The other thing, working with Ed as my sort of editor, I really liked the idea, or like how the book, what this all means, did. I think that's such a great way of engaging, and I love the sort of historical fiction aspect. And so I'd always sort of imagined this book to have an intro that was sort of a historical fiction piece. So I wrote a small bit, gave it to Ed, and he was like, I love this, like we need more of these. And so I was like, oh, maybe I'll like bookend it and do one at the end. And then I did that, and he said, no, we need more. So in the end, there were 7 of these pieces in there. Another thing that Ed really pushed on me was, for me, it really was a book about this ancestor. And he kept saying, my story and my experiences, I searched for identity, is something that resonates with many young Indigenous youth, and that let's highlight that story as well. And so I kind of kicking and screaming went along with him, and I'm glad he persevered, because I think it really worked out. So the new book, when it did come out in 2018, here's the cover of it. Dibajamendwa Gediag Ogios Nojikigo Away Debinawag Nibing Ojik. Stories of the Old One, Hunter and Fisher from South Waters. Really wanted to highlight the Anishinaabe language throughout the book, make it visually appealing. And so I'm just going to show you a few of the spreads from it. Mark Thompson was really instrumental. He was the one that actually helped in the ceremony that was conducted before the individual was brought out. And he was really influential in showing me, sort of like opening my eyes on different ways of knowing. I mean, he would hold some of the tools and he would say, oh, this was used for this. And yeah, a remarkable guy. And it was over the years, because it started in 1998 when the museum got involved, and only got published in 2018. But right at the beginning, I would meet with Mark and I'd say, oh, I'm working really hard. I'm trying to get this thing done. And he would say, just relax. It's going to happen when it's going to happen. Don't push it. If you push it, it's not going to be right. You've got to have patience when you work with the ancestors. And sort of didn't quite resonate with me at the time, but I kind of have this feeling that he knew it was going to take 20 years to get it out. He unfortunately has passed away before we were able to publish the book, but I put his name in as sort of a contributor right in the very beginning, because he was so instrumental to me as my personal growth, but also with helping out with it. Here's one of the historic fictions. So I took some pieces out of the Manitoba Museum galleries and developed these sort of spirit stories that we called, and how people moved across the landscape and experiences that this ancestor may have had 4,000 years ago. I also wanted to incorporate, this is where Jamie came in, contemporary Indigenous art. And so she would connect me with Indigenous artists in Manitoba. And here's a Linus Woods piece entitled After the Next Ice Age. And there's a little guy surfing on this glacial lake. And I thought that was kind of a cool piece. So we integrated, I think, about 11 or 12 pieces of contemporary Indigenous art. I think initially I was hoping I would be really happy if I had one, and Jamie really pushed the envelope, and we were able to get quite a bit more into the book itself. I also profiled a bunch of animals. I wanted to make sure that we sort of profiled these animals, habits, behaviors, their distribution. I mean, I was able to highlight grizzly bears and elk, which aren't currently in that area of Southeast Manitoba, but were in the past. And so talking about these animals and their sort of shrinking distribution and impacts on their habitat and that kind of thing. Again, I was able to do more on the fishing tools, taking up some of my experimental archaeology, made the harpoon and had it hafted, and we used that. It's not just a beaver, like we talk about these beaver incisors being used as carving tools. And here's an example of a beaver incisor being hafted in there. And so again, visually stunning. I really wanted to get this thing as a beautiful book, and it did a really great job at pulling those things together. Here's Jamie Isaac and a few of the other pieces that we integrated into there. And it was just a great opportunity. We also highlighted quite a few artists from Seguin as well in that project. And so it was a great way of, the community really felt part of this project, that they were being integrated into all sort of aspects of it. And then I kind of want to sort of wrap up my talk, coming back to a diorama. I started in saying how excited I was going to the museum when I was just a kid, and I helped out in the latest mini diorama at the Manitoba Museum. Came out in about 2014, and I worked with the diorama artist and First Nation communities, and we developed this one with the idea of like inspiring next generation. So we took 2 archaeological sites, one in the Duck Mountains and one in a fishing area. Another site sort of imagined, not based on a specific archaeological site, where people had been doing maple sugaring. And I've got a picture. Here's Betsy Thorstensen. She's our diorama artist, and put this together, and it is sort of through seasons. So it goes through a midwinter season, the traveling moon, a sugaring moon, and then a fish weir on the far side. And so it sort of blends all of these pieces together. And I really was excited to be a part of that, just knowing how magical these are. And, you know, I mean, Betsy would just get better and better with the more of these that she did. And this was her sort of swan song. It was the last diorama she made for us, and it is unbelievable. Anybody, I certainly recommend, if you get a chance to come to the museum, you got to check out this one, and all of the exhibits we do. But yeah, this is kind of where I've been for the last while, and how I've sort of integrated the teachings and experiences I've had, and how those shaped myself as an archaeologist, and how I sort of see the role of archaeology, and how to, you know, improve engagement with communities. And that's much broader than just with, you know, visiting public. This is to First Nation community and non-archaeologists. How do we communicate what we do? And so it's been a real honor to be here today and tonight. I want to say Kinyanesko Mitten, thank you very much. And just acknowledging the elders and ancestors, relatives, mentors, teachers, and friends. And yeah, thanks to the Minnesota Archaeological Society for inviting me here. I'm very much looking forward to answering any questions we've got.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kevin. That was such a fascinating presentation. I have a couple questions that have come in the chat, so I'd be happy to ask a few of those. Also, a few comments just echoing the sentiment of wonderful presentation. It was so interesting. Someone is asking, they would love to hear your thoughts on how you would like to see archaeology as a field move towards being more collaborative with descendant Indigenous communities.
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I think sometimes it's being a little bit, how would I say, being humble as you come into these places. Because what I've found, the more times I get into, you know, working with these knowledgeable community people, it's recognizing that they have this unbelievable skill. And I see myself, I mean, as a real facilitator and helping them, you know, taking the skills that I have as a trained archaeologist, but really sort of, you know, they are the knowledgeable, they are the experts in some of these things. And I think that goes a long way, that, you know, we don't come in and presume to be the experts with all of the training. I think that I think goes a long way. Being open and honest with them goes a huge way as we sort of look to collaborations, finding out what they would like to see as a result. Like, it's not, and it's certainly it's a two-way street. Manitoba Museum probably wouldn't have entered into some of these projects if there wasn't something in it for the museum where we could incorporate it into a display case. And so, you know, we can't do anything as a nonprofit and limited resources. We can't jump into every project, but I think setting those sort of guidelines early on, and sort of saying, we want to help you, but there's also got to be a little bit of a reciprocal thing. And I found that worked really, really well over the time. But yeah, honest and yeah, really seeing these as real contributing people. I through so much of my stuff, they have helped influence my interpretations and understanding of what I see archaeologically. It has been really important.
Thank you. Another question that came in is that you had mentioned study continues after repatriation. How does that occur?
Yeah, so my master's thesis that was sort of looking at the tools associated with that 4,000-year-old from Through Point Lake. It was the one with the harpoons and the antler adze and the birch bark peeling tool. So that collection of tools, by the time I had started my master's, had been reburied. But Lee Sims at the Manitoba Museum had taken vinyl molds of the use wear, or like the sort of functioning edges of the tools. And we were able to use those, create dental stone casts, and then do a wear pattern analysis. So while we no longer had the tools, we were able to do wear pattern analysis on those, because good photographs and drawings were made of the tools when they were out. We were able to integrate that. And so we didn't physically need those tools there as we did it. Not that we could do all studies, because some things do need the physical pieces to be able to go, but I think we need to be creative and sort of say, what are the ways that we can sort of facilitate any kind of research after these individuals go back. Because again, I think a lot of this stuff with proper documentation, we have these, the tools and these ancestors can still reveal new interpretations, new understandings as we really look at these places, these artifacts.
Excellent. Another question. Someone's wondering if you have any upcoming work you're planning in the future, or if there's a project that you would really love to work on, like something you might have your eye towards for future research.
Yeah, I guess a couple of things. I've loved, sort of fell in love with pottery. I mean, the boreal forests, one of the sort of iconic things, particularly for the woodland period, are the ceramics. And having spent so much time with people like Grant Goltz, seeing pots being made, cooking inside of them, doing that kind of stuff has been really fascinating for me. And so I've been really fortunate to work with some contemporary artists. Actually, I'd encouraged a local artist from Manitoba, Casey Adams, to go down and learn from Grant how to weave those textile bags that he does. And she went down and has come back, and she is making these amazing pots, and they are modern decoration, but she is certainly drawing on the past, and she's been using sort of some of the techniques that Grant has taught her. And I think it's just such an amazing thing to see. This is not something in the past, that this is something that continues to live on. So ceramic analysis, I am dying to get my hands into that. I'm from the Boreal Forest. The Boreal Forest is where I've done most of my work, and we just finished at the Manitoba Museum a prairies gallery, and it's taken the last sort of 7 years of my life quite extensively. And I'm relieved as we open those, and our next sort of gallery renewal is our Boreal Forest. And so I'm excited to get into Boreal Forest, new research, some of the collections as well. So yeah, the forest in the north, I'm really looking forward to getting into.
Fantastic. Thank you. At this time, I don't have any further questions that have come in. If anyone has a last minute question, please drop it in the chat at this time. Otherwise, thank you so much again for joining us this evening, Kevin. This has been such a wonderful presentation and such a treat to have you join us this evening. Awesome.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. It is a pleasure. Recognize the number of familiar faces on the Zoom calls. So hello to all my friends, and great to meet new people. So thanks so much for inviting me.